Well, ladies and gents, this is a very special panel. I shouldn't even call it a panel. I think we should call this a facilitated discussion because I thought we get these three brains together and we're going to talk about the topic of the conference today, which is convergence. Each of them are expert in multiple fields and are going to help us examine how these fields can come together and how these converged technologies can help us all with our missions and maybe give a little insight into the future, I hope. So I'll give a brief introduction of each of them. I will allow you to correct the record if I get any of this wrong. And then I have a list of hard questions. I hope they're hard. And start a discussion. And the rules are, please feel free to argue, push back, generate some knowledge, and really let's try to figure out what the future is going to bring to us. So my definition of who these people are, I just really admire all of them. I've followed them. They're great leaders, techno-philosophers. Andrew, I met in San Francisco, some mutual friends. Andre Watson, who's here, connected us. And this guy organized an event called San Francisco Deep Tech Week, which I'm still thinking about. It was awesome, a full week, 40 different events, over 40 different events on all subjects, deep tech, biotech, energy, including nuclear, defense tech. He was really great at defense tech. His opening event was on an aircraft carrier, which sends a great message to innovators there that, national security has always been dependent on deep tech. And I really appreciated him doing this. He's a nuclear physicist trained and runs a company, Hyperstition. Hyperstition, which was a new word for me. It's kind of like a superstition, but it's hyperstition. And I really think of him as a philosopher and a leader because he's very active in thinking and then writing what he thinks and putting that out in social media for anyone to digest, and it's been critically important to me. Mac, I think many of you know Mac from his time he was in the Marine Corps and in the intelligence community and helped stand up this organization in Department of Defense, the DIU, which was there to bridge a lot of gaps between the innovators in America and the national defense sector. And he's still there advising on DIU and the intel community and is a great leader and thinker on all things tech and mission needs. And Katrina has held many engineering jobs in government, including at the most senior levels of government, leading cadres of engineers. But also I think she's a great philosopher and thinker. Every conversation we've ever had, whether it's about history or technology or society, she's really brought a lot of insights. And I think these are the perfect people to help us figure out where all of this converged technology is going. And with that, I want to ask each of you to give us 2 minutes. First of all, correct the record if you think I got your bio wrong, and also tell us what you think about this coming world. Andrew?
Sure, thanks so much, and happy to be here, honored to have the introduction. Only thing, not nuclear physicist, engineering physicist.
Engineering physicist.
Which is a weird, anyway, I also worked in biotech and AI and stuff in the past. Yeah, so convergence, it's kind of, I would say the frontier of innovation for the last perhaps 2 decades has been, at least in the startup world, primarily focused in the world of software development. And software has provided this abundant frontier because it's been largely unregulated. And I think now as sort of AI and LLMs and automated software production, you can kind of think in some way as like the completion of the software project, where now you can actually develop new programs, apps, and applications without having to learn a software language, rather interfacing through natural language. And so this is sort of, for a long time, the high returns generated in the software industry, to some extent, has been 2 dynamics. One, it's a blue ocean market, so there's winner-take-all advantages, but there's also this big arbitrage on developer talent. So historically high developer salaries, as well as winner-take-all market dynamics, has produced this series of very large outcomes from a venture investment perspective. Now, there's not going to be another Google. There's not going to be another Facebook. Those kind of niches have been occupied, and we've sort of exhausted the lowest hanging fruit. And now, I would say you'll see many new software companies that are very highly specific and very niche, with a very much cheaper sort of labor cost basis. But the frontier of innovation has to now move back to the physical domain, and kind of, they call it deep tech, but that's always been technology, is things like transistors or radio frequency technology or building steam engines in the world of atoms. And I would say the divergence in this sense is more that things like aerospace and energy and biotech and manufacturing and defense, these are all very different verticals, but the venture capital investment community is now interested into all of them, and each of them has a very unique market dynamic and cost structure. And so people that have traditionally just been focused in software now have to kind of relearn the basics of, say, mechanical engineering or electrical engineering or chemical engineering and these things. And now the barrier to innovation often is now just the regulatory landscape and how we regulate the world of atoms. And so I would say, the convergence is, let's get back to fundamental innovation. And when you do fundamental innovation, you're not competing for some existing market share, you're actually inventing a new market. And the best example of that is probably SpaceX and the new space industry. But again, it's the regulatory landscape, and so the convergence is, well, how do we, escape past decades of perhaps regulatory capture that have defended incumbents and prevented innovation in these fundamental atoms first industries? And that, I think, does unlock like a new tier of abundance beyond just software services, which we've enjoyed for the last couple decades.
Great. Mac?
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to follow that. As a former Marine, when they mentioned convergence, I had to go look it up to kind of figure out what that meant. Yeah, I want to tie on to something that you touched on just a little bit, which is the regulatory environment. And I want to take it up to about the 30,000-foot level. We just got a great threat brief on what the world's looking like. We've got a massive realignment in the world between Western-style democracies and authoritarian regimes, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Cold War. We've had the rapid acceleration of technology in conjunction with that. And we've had just an explosion in access to information over the last 20 years. So I see those as pressures that are forcing a convergence, and there's a couple of results that I just want to touch on real quickly, and then sort of break it down to where it matters, where I'm at the Defense Innovation Unit. Is one, we're in a Cold War. Economic warfare is ongoing. We've got two regional conflicts. Russian tanks are rolling across the steppes, and the Mideast is a dumpster fire. That could very rapidly expand into the South China Sea. Economic warfare is happening in South America and Africa. If you look at how we're looking at rare earth elements and how other countries are. The second thing that is sort of a result of that has been a sort of tie-in on how we react to technology. How we've taken that and as a society, but two, as the government. With those pressures, we're really seeing two things. We're seeing the Cold War, but we're also seeing a change in the nature of warfare, and that's largely driven by the rapid pace of technology. So whereas we went from battleships to aircraft carriers, and we've been in with aircraft carriers since 1945, what we're seeing now is the rise of cyber, autonomy, AI. These are the battlefields, weapons of the future. Right now we're trading, $2 million missiles with Houthi drones at $100,000. We're seeing the primary weapon on the battlefield of Russia be the FPV, which costs $500. What does that mean for the government? And what does that mean for the government acquisitions? If we've got all these pressures that are on the government, we've got the threat pressure, we've got the technology pressure, we have the information pressure, it's forcing us to rethink how we do acquisition. What's the regulatory environment? You touched on that a little bit. If we don't rethink things from the ground up, we will not be competitive with these peer allies. And I see that as the primary convergence in my work.
Great.
Well, these two gentlemen just set me up really great. So if you take a look in my lifetime, I was born before there was a cell phone. And now we're talking about biotech, where we can put on a film of material on a surface of a soldier's skin that can deposit some sort of antigen if there's something that triggers its response. Think of the multitude of things that have changed over that, I won't say, but 50 decades, 5 decades, 10 decades. So if we look at what we've got in front of us, the convergence of science is really based predominantly on what you heard today. With the increased capacity to compute, people can now rely on more accurate information relative to the science that they're pursuing. And sciences have lived in 3 different or 4 different or 5 different domains, and I'll just take 3. Biology in the past, and I'll use a metaphor, it's not accurate, but it's close. If 2 frogs did it twice, maybe 10 times, it's what frogs do, and we relied on it. If chemistry was to be the target, we make a hypothesis, we take a look at the chemical equation that could match that hypothesis, and we test it out with things that we feel will allow for us to have some sort of certainty, maybe 1 sigma, maybe a half a sigma to confidence to get to that level. However, with material science and other sciences of the hard science, we want to know at the molecular level, hence the advent of the electron microscope for looking at materials, if you would. Those 3 sciences are converging. We're now looking at biology to be able to do computing using non-hardware. We're looking at biological computing. Those different sciences are trying to converge on agreement and how to measure, verify, veracity, ethical, all those different things right now. If there's anything that we have as a nation, it's an ethical sort of guidepost. And we believe that we need to have confidence in what we do, that we deliver to our American citizens. And as a government, we put into place guide rails for convincing ourselves that we're not going to hit Chicago and we're aiming at North Korea. So we're in a dilemma for our sciences. When we're wanting to move forward, we have to find ways of doing so in a fashion that meets the speed of the pace of this technology, and we're not set up to do so. To the point of Mac here, I grew up in the Marine Corps working for them for about 27 years, and then it was great time because I avoided every bureaucracy that I could possibly avoid and had great cover for it. As soon as I walked into the Missile Defense Agency or to the Pentagon, I had people bring in a stack of books this high that said, here's your guideposts. That cannot be absorbed by an entry person to work for the government at the speed that the technology is moving at, complexed with, in order for testing, of which I had to do also in my career, the parameters to which we guarantee our soldiers and sailors, et cetera, confidence in the ability of whatever we're building to work. We measure it with a micrometer and below, and the sciences aren't ready for that. So my look at the future, I have hope because I've heard a whole bunch of things today that I can tell you I marked down. But I also say to this community, hey, we got to get moving on and figure out ways to give the government and the people the ability to trust what we're doing.
I think that's an important point. I would like all of your thoughts on that. Maybe the way I'd frame it is, I wish I could ask a simple question like, what does it mean when we say a convergence of AI plus bio plus chem plus material science plus space science? What does that convergence give us? But we need to ask a different question, which is, how do we enable trust between all these different disciplines better? And maybe you guys can be part of that solution. I think part of the building trust is getting to know the other discipline, but you grow up in a stovepipe. You only know your thing you've been trained on and that you work on. If you're a biochemist, that's what you do. And that is your methodology, and it's the whole framing of your life. And now you're supposed to trust some space scientist or a defense tech scientist or an IT guy, and on and on and on. So maybe the question becomes not what does this convergence equal, but how do we build trust between these disciplines? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can chime in. So I think probably the thing to think about is the rate limiter on progress and collaboration has been 2 things: intelligence and then communication throughput or bandwidth. Also, like in governmental and institutional change, the history of bureaucracy really starts with a clerk whose job is primarily information storage and retrieval. Well, this is what a large language model does implicitly. So I think there's opportunities in terms of organizational change in getting faster moving responses, is thinking about how can we collapse chains of hierarchy or intermediaries who primarily are in the role of, say, summarizing and reporting functions, and using intelligence and intelligence at scale, right, as it's manifested in GPUs today. I would think also, frontier of science has gotten so large, the front line is so big. A person only has so many, usable decades of a career to become a specialist, and biology is already incredibly fractured, and the specialties, are very siloed from each other. So having this kind of cross-compatibility of communication, you know, it's the rise of the generalist, right? The person that can maybe not be an expert in many topics, but rather knows enough to translate between them. And again, the LLM as a turbo generalist comes up, and I don't expect AI architectures in their current manifestation to actually push the frontier of new scientific knowledge, but rather to act as a cross-disciplinary communication tool. And so I think if you think of these as like, we can scale up intelligence, and that reduces the cost basis of pretty much every kind of economic activity. And then also, as you introduce these things into high-performing organizations, they can do things like accelerate manufacturing, or make you know, biological research faster, or more performant, or explore the space of solutions much more quickly. I would say the rate limiter actually becomes us, and our willingness to trust this new technology and incorporate it into our daily lives and into our organizations. And that's, you know, we are the biggest impediments to progress. It's no longer our mastery over science and technology, rather it's our willingness to use what we have learned effectively within our own, you know, areas of activity.
That's great. Mac, thoughts?
Well, I'll jump in. To me, I think what Andrew just talked about is very important to really restate, and that is we have some additional tools at bay if we're having good data that we could help us process that and give us confidence by looking at the trending. And the other piece is let's get into some pilots where we trust ourselves well enough to try it out a few times and see if we can't get more tools built and designed to allow us, similar to the electron microscope equivalent, in this area where we can actually confirm to ourselves as humans, which is where our limitation lies, that there is an ability to trust. Mac?
Yeah. Once again, as a poli-sci major, I'm probably not going to get into the specifics of how we do interdisciplinary science, but I will speak a little bit to pressures and incentives. We talked a little bit in my opening comments about the pressures on the systems to move forward, to adopt and adapt with these technologies. But also, we think we need to look at the incentive side. You know, where are the incentives to adopt these technologies? Certainly there's a battlefield incentive, certainly there's an operational and an analytical incentive to do that, but where are the incentives on the folks that are really bringing those aboard? Where are the incentives on the PEOs? Where are the incentives on the services to do those things? I think by focusing on both sides of that coin, maybe we can move a little bit quicker.
Can I riff on that for a minute, Bob? So there's nothing more energizing than to know that you might die tomorrow. What's interesting, though, is people are more willing to die than they are to lose their careers. And I think that there is an issue on the table that says we need to find a way to communicate to our population and incentivize them appropriately to recognize that our way of life is under jeopardy and that we are truly at war. It's not kinetic. It's there, though, and it's economic. And the economic engine of the nation, which is the development of these technologies, is at what was at risk. And adoption and adaptation is no longer an option. It's a must-do.
Well, you raised another point. Mac, did you say you're a poli-sci major?
Way back when.
Well, you could build a case that says in this world, the senior science has to be political science. To get all of these other sciences aligned and working together, we need people who understand human nature and how to build trust and coordinate between these disciplines. What do you think of that thesis?
Yeah, I'm not going to claim that political science is actually a science. I don't remember doing a whole lot of experiments.
Oh, no, there's one going on right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. We just went through one last night. Yeah, I think people underestimate the people element to this. And, you know, from leadership down, everybody has a role and responsibility in moving us forward against these problem sets. And I think there's an empowering piece that's sometimes lost in bureaucracies. You get into a hierarchical organization where your boss has a boss and he has a boss and so on and so forth. Like, what do you really own? So how do we bring that back into sort of our acquisition process? One of the things I loved about DIU, you know, coming from the Central Intelligence Agency and from the Marine Corps, both of those are very hierarchical organizations. I got to the Defense Innovation Unit and it was flat. We had the director and everybody else. So we could move quickly. Everybody felt empowered. They felt like they were part of this process. When we talk about like restructuring acquisition, there's also just the restructuring of government. Like, are these existing organizations and their current structures and processes meeting the needs of the American people? I think you can make a pretty compelling argument that, hey, we have not adapted these organizations to our current environment.
Can I chime in on that? I actually like the poli-sci as being the kind of first science, because I think basically everything is downstream of incentives. And we didn't actually get the scientific revolution until people were living in a social and political structure that actually welcomed divergent opinions. And I would say it's like, when you think about, you mentioned it's kind of like we're forced to respond to these exogenous shocks, whether it's in economic warfare or a changing battlefield landscape. When conditions change, diversity is the wellspring of adaptability. And if you have quenched diversity by enforcing conformist views, or when the range of debate, when there becomes ideas that are off limits, that's a dangerous situation. There's nothing more dangerous to innovation than consensus-based thinking, actually. And it is always innovation comes from the tail ends of the distribution, right? The people that are outside the box, that are once labeled as insane. I mean, Einstein was labeled, oh, this is crazy, right? But no, that's actually how it works. I mean, Galileo had this great quote, the authority of 100 individuals is nothing to the questioning of a rational mind, right? So being willing to question how things are done right now, being willing to speak up about that, and for people that are in positions of power, it's to actually you're not gonna get fired for speaking out of, about something that we think is a contrarian perspective. And this is the number one thing in the startup and venture capital community is what's the contrarian thing you think that you believe is true? What is everyone else wrong about? Because it's that thing that is going to be the solution to the challenge you don't see coming, and it's ensuring that those people are able to have a diversity of opinions in a kind of a democratic republic, right? Like that's the whole point, So as soon as we lose this, as soon as we lose this perspective that I may disagree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it, as soon as that's dead, you've lost your democracy, you've lost your wellspring of diverse thinking, and you are no longer able to effectively adapt to changing circumstances.
Can you guys argue with that?
No. I got your back 100% on that.
Yeah, all right, yeah, sounds logical to me, it really does. So, but now, some of these disciplines, you spend so much time, maybe you're in pharmaceutical. You have to do it that way, and it takes you 9 years before you really see the results of this. But then you have a great product, or maybe it's T-cell therapies that takes forever and billions of dollars worth of investment. But then you have a cure for a particular type of cancer, and doing that for so long, it requires standard policies and standard methods, a little bit of innovation. And now we're talking about, can we converge that with these other disciplines to create bigger, better solutions? And that's the part I'm still trying to get my head around. How do we build trust between all these different disciplines so they can converge and accelerate faster to support our missions?
All right. Faded. So for me, in personal experience, because I have multiple degrees, one of my biggest challenges was getting to the class grade that I could pass and move on. And I found that it is almost an incredible journey, because I'm not a people person, so I vote the poli-sci in charge, and walk towards trying to get a way of getting to the answer I need getting done through this bureaucracy of process. And so, for just open disclosure, I was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, and I had oversight over all the different disciplines in the government, intelligence, non-intelligence, everything. And one of the problems I had was, on top of just the bureaucracy, which, by the way, the federal acquisition regulations are literally 3 foot high, trying to find a pathway through that. There is one, you will find it, but it takes you too much time. And it was built around post-World War II decade of manufacturing and R&D. Doesn't match today. One of the things that I would offer is the pilots like DAU, AFWorks, all the different types of speed things still comply, even though they've got special authorities under FAR Part 15 or something, FAR Part 12, where they can do other transaction authorities or other types of contracting on behalf of the government, it still has the bureaucracy of, like you were talking about, who gets to check my work? I can probably go twice as fast if I had one check on my work. That's one thing that would be removed. The second would be if I all had an agreement in the beginning of what an outcome that's successful looks like. Try to find that in the services. You're dealing with multiple views on a common issue. So I think to try to get to an answer, I really do believe one thing that everybody believes in is data. It removes the emotional part. If we could do more pilots of different trials of systems where we would agree upon what an objective-based outcome would look like and pathway it so that we can try out tools that are different. And the incentives have to be put to the side because the incentive structure is entirely around Congress and the money. You know, it's not just the money, it's all about the money. And so in order for us to take a look differently, we'd have to have a small enough, so it wouldn't irritate, small enough pilot to try it out and start building that credibility.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the sort of personal incentives and pressures and things like that. I think one of the things is sort of a shared common value system, and I don't mean like personal values, I mean sort of country values. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, the information age that we're in. And I hark back to when the first printing press came around. Europe spent the next 30 years at war because nobody knew the truth anymore. Before that, the church had the truth. But once you started being able to print up your ideas and send them around and share them with other people, that was a radical change in the way people thought about information. We're going through that now. You know, what is the truth? Is it subjective? Is it an actual thing? So how do we get back to, and I'm speaking sort of nationally first, but then internationally with our allies, how do we get back to that common set of truths, values, and goals? On a microcosm of that is when you look at some of these problems like solving Alzheimer's or any of these other big problems, there's something that's there in every one of us that I believe that you can appeal to that is the greater common good. Obviously, profiting is necessary for these companies, but there's also that, hey, when Kennedy said, you know, we're going to go into the moon, everybody was like, yeah, we're going to the moon. Maybe a little bit of that could help as well.
Right. Well, let's talk about convergence of technologies from an adversary perspective. One thing I don't think we want is for China, for example, to accelerate their convergence of technologies faster than us. And it looks like they steal a lot of our info, and then they field it, they turn it into product, and they field those products fast. Are there things we can do to slow down their convergence of technologies or interfere with it, to slow them down to our pace at least? Maybe we suggest that they have new compliance frameworks before they field anything.
I think we should give them the federal acquisition regulations.
Yeah.
That's funny because we tried that. Just letting you know. One thing that you might think about is the culture of China is one that wants to carry with it a sense of constant respect and regard. If we can shame them into understanding the risks and globally position them to look bad if they don't adhere to certain risk-averse procedures, processes, yes. But I personally don't see that to be enough, and I'm not certain that anything at this point that we could say could slow them down because they're seeing how afraid we are. We're public in our concern about the government. We're public in our concern about what they're doing in terms of advancements. They're no longer a follower. They're a leader in certain areas. Nobody wants to say that publicly because it's sort of against our culture to think of ourselves as possibly a follower. But in terms of opportunity space, we still have opportunity space. The one thing that was discussed up here, which is freedom of thought and freedom of speech, is not held in common regard there. And that allows for that diversity of thought to come to the table and be innovative and take a new and novel approach that doesn't necessarily comply with the going opinion. So there is chance.
So maybe we should move faster, but let's keep them from stealing our stuff, if possible.
Absolutely.
Well, I would just add in, I mean, yeah, the fundamental trade-off is an open versus closed society. So an open society, we don't want to change our openness because that would actually limit our pace of innovation. So, we out-innovate, but they out-execute because they are more, top-down control structure, no room for dissent, far more mobilized. I would say one thing that you can learn from another country like that is having a highly competent and professionally trained civil service that executes on projects like nuclear power plant construction, right? Like this is the best. So I'm a nuclear guy, pro-nuclear guy. There's a great phrase which is like, in America there are 3 types of cheese and 100 types of nuclear power plants, and in France it's the opposite, right? So the French have a very well-trained civil service. Their only job is to build nuclear power plants. Same with metro tunnels. Where in the United States, if you want to build a nuclear power plant, it's like an airport. Everyone is different. They're always using locally sourced contractors, all this kind of stuff. So we got to look at a couple things. One is like, why is the cost of civil infrastructure projects ballooning out of control, right? The Golden Gate Bridge was built for an inflation-adjusted amount, $2020, of $767 million and completed on time. And the suicide nets they installed a few years back were $500 million. Okay, so it's like, how is a country like China out executing us on infrastructure development projects? Like, maybe we don't need 375 environmental review boards to repave a street in San Francisco, possibly. I would think another thing though is, oh wait, where was I going with this originally? How did China get rich? They were a peasant agrarian economy, right? And everyone thought, well, we can drive a whole lot of short-term improvements in our cost structure by outsourcing to a country with much more lax environmental and labor laws. And they built factories to build stuff for us. So another thing to think about is like, how do we gut the middle class, right? How do we offshore all of our production? How is there hundreds of Chinese manufacturers of chips and sensors and devices that are in every single military defense product today? And what kinds of backdoors can they engineer in those without us knowing? And so it's like, you really got to think. It's like, how are we, the short-term gain for the long-term loss is a game we've been playing for a long time, and now we're kind of reaping what we've sowed in all of the manufacturing capacity belonging to your geopolitical adversary.
Yeah, and just tying into that with one thought, free and open society versus closed society. The economic incentives to the population are relatively the same, which is something that authoritarian countries hadn't had in the past. That makes China just a little bit more dangerous because there are people out there making money with innovation. What remains a competitive advantage for us, I think, is our partners and allies. It's like Western-style democracy has its own advantages and appeals, not to all of our allies, but certainly to some important ones.
Another analogy I want to try on you folks, and that is, okay, back to building trust between multiple disciplines that we want to converge and go faster because our mission requires it, our economy requires it, it's just good for society. Are there lessons from the military that can apply here? I'm thinking specifically about joint combat operations or combined arms operations. If you're in a battlefield environment and one group moves faster than the other, that's very dangerous. Or if artillery fires are called in at the wrong time in the wrong place, that's dangerous. You have to coordinate and synchronize all that stuff to make progress. So the question is, are there lessons from the military that can help in our approach to accelerating convergence of these technologies?
Very careful. Be very, very careful. One thing that we learned about is if you have a single view, that means you have a single failure. So multiple views actually have value when it comes to true operations in a battlefield or otherwise. So that can apply very well to this technology space, is you probably want to have more than one view on how you do things, whether it's how you interface between sciences or how you would apply the sciences. However, the discipline, which I think we mentioned here earlier, which is a ability to understand what your outcome should look like and have boundary conditions associated with that, would definitely be a value to the community for science and technology. I think the problems that we have could be overcome by certain approaches, and one of them is dual-use technology. Dual-use technology, in terms of having the ability of the military ethos apply to the commercial world, actually has value, and I'll take facial recognition as a technology. In the medical field, as you heard earlier, that technology is saving lives. Well, it's also saving lives on the military side, where it uses that type of technology for detection when you're using surveillance or other methodologies to look at surface of the earth or other places. And yet they are commercially able to make money, be able to take risk where we don't, and the military can then speed up its ability to adapt and adopt. So I often counsel, where I'm talking to commercial industries or defense industries, if they want to make it faster into the government, find a commercial application, because then I can pick it up off the shelf really quick. I can adopt it much faster. Just some ideas.
Yeah, I think the place I arrive at with that question is, it's really a mission focus. One thing I learned very early on in my Marine Corps career is, hey, everybody's got to know what the mission is, and everybody's got to be empowered to act upon that. Frankly, I see hundreds of companies every couple months, and the military units, the companies, the venture capital, doesn't matter what they're doing, is they have that common understanding of mission and commitment to that mission. When we get into regulations and activities in the Department of Defense and the IC and everything else, I think that piece is really getting lost. Is like, okay, what are we here to do? What's the common sort of mission statement? In the Marine Corps, it's locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by means of fire and maneuver. In the CIA, it's to collect intelligence that matters, analyze that intelligence, and do covert action. If you're not directly contributing to those things, like, what are you doing? Can we get back to that a little bit, both on a commercial sense, which I touched on a little bit earlier, talk about Alzheimer's, those types of things, but also in the government?
I had one little small thing there. I was going to say the mission thing for sure. And one thing, if everyone in the organization understands what the actual mission is, and there's this thing of delegation of responsibility to execute at the small scale, it's kind of like the pilot knows what's best. Like, you're not going to fly the plane for him. And same, a lot of high-performing engineering organizations, they know where they fit in the organization, and they know what the mission is, and they have the, responsibility or authority to actually make the decisions on the spot when the time comes. They don't have to apply for permission, and it works its way up through all these committees, and then it winds back down. I had a friend that worked for a defense contractor, I won't name which one, but he wanted to install some software, and it took like 6 weeks for approval. And it's just, you got to trust the people
that was
that are
fast.
You got to trust the people on the ground to execute to the best of their ability, and if you don't trust them to the best of their ability, then you probably hired the wrong person.
This does get to another point I wanted to raise, and that is, so I was an IT guy, and you don't do IT in an enterprise unless you understand controls. You have to have standards. There's protocols you have to follow. Some simple examples would be networking. You're going to pick a common protocol. Maybe it's TCP IP, the protocols of the internet, or if it's long-haul comms, it's the appropriate long-haul comms protocols. You want standard ways of storing your data, encrypting your data, et cetera, and you want standard security protocols. You want multi-factor authentication, on and on. So there's all sorts of controls. But it could be that controls these days have been taken to extremes. And a clear example, I think, personally, is AI. There's so much fear over AI that there's been so many new rules and regulations. The longest presidential executive order in history is on AI. There's AI officers being appointed in every agency, and their job is not to go faster. I think it's another waypoint. It's another group that can say no. And I hope I'm not, I hope none of you are, don't take offense at that, but that's my view. There are other organizations in government whose job is to make AI go faster. Faster to the mission, like the things that General Groen stood up. That's, go faster. Let's do the right mission-focused thing. But maybe not enough of those in my view. So in some meetings I've been having in our circles and with government people, I've mentioned a new word to them. I say, I think it's time we start thinking about decontrol. what controls can we relax to go faster? And when I say that in some of these groups, some people get angry. And it's like, what do you mean? And some folks, I mean, their ears will turn red and they'll argue and say, there's no way we're going to decontrol this stuff. It's too serious of a threat. There's a huge threat that AI is going to dominate our world and be the constant always-on surveillance and will mislead us into doing the wrong thing and taking the wrong action. My view is, well, let's let humans make the judgment on what's right and go faster. And to do that, we might need to reduce some controls or maybe empower individuals to use their judgment on which controls do not apply in that situation. So personally, I want us all to think about that word decontrol, to go faster, and that could also help with this topic of convergence. Now, thought about this thesis? Is it time for decontrol? And how do we decontrol? First, argue. Is it a wrong approach?
No, it's not. So back in 2012, we had a new startup program that would have been at the major systems level, which is the billion something, half. But I asked them to tailor what they would have to go for getting permissions. Tailor means tell me why you have to have something to be reviewed or approved to get moving forward. It was remarkable, all of the antibodies that came out. When everybody complains about the acquisition system and they're given a carte blanche to actually tailor out, which means say why you have to have something rather than here's all, you have your environmental, you have your logistics, tell me why you have to have something rather than, nobody could do it. So I wonder if we haven't lost our ability as a community to understand where risk profiles are. That trade of risk, where is it an acceptable risk? Today we have a zero tolerance for failure. That wasn't true during the World War II period, post-World War II period, really frankly through the Vietnam War. We had a tolerance for failure. And now, because perhaps media, because perhaps many other things, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but there has to be some reason why we need people who understand where that risk is and allow for that freedom to change the profile of where they're going to operate at.
Yeah, I really agree with that too. I think it is a risk tolerance perspective, and it's also just on the original statement, this thing around AI and controlling AI. I always have a very simple framework, which is people gain control over you by selling you a narrative of fear. And AI is unknown, and there's lots of dystopian science fiction. We've all read about that kind of stuff. And you can either face the unknown with fear or with curiosity. And to face it with curiosity is to be grounded in the present and to take risks in small, safe, contained ways. And I think that's, earlier there was people up on stage talking about praxis or these other kinds of new ideas, recognizing that if you could have a small city or a tract of land where people could volunteer to try an experimental genetic therapy or basically innovate outside the usual bounds of governmental regulation. And you want safety controls for the population as a whole. I 100% agree with that, but an individual has the right to take risks when they're informed of those risks. And so I think that is, the biggest thing is great examples today, so to certify a new airframe, for commercial airline travel takes about $5 billion, right? And so there's basically only Boeing in the United States. And look at Boeing today, right? Are they innovating? No. All of their airframes were designed in the 60s. And they've achieved some improvements in fuel savings, that kind of stuff. But you got to think it's the more regulatory overhead there are for risk prevention, the less innovation you'll have just as a natural result. In the earliest days of aviation, people were jumping off the Eiffel Tower with an umbrella or something like that. But I guess it wasn't against the law. I'm not saying let's go back there, but you got to have some willingness for risk tolerance and ways of failing where the risks or the damages don't propagate,
Yeah, one thought that's come to me sort of when you look at the regulations, obviously we need guardrails. They need to be prudent, well thought out, and allow a measure of risk built into those systems. But they also, does each and every agency and service need different ones? Can't we just decide on one set that works for the Marine Corps, and the Navy and the Air Force and the Army and the CIA and NSA? If you look at just the reciprocity issues, like security clearances. For most of my career, I had multiple security background investigations because nobody would accept anybody else. You look at the ATO processes. do we need to have different ones for every organization in the government to run on your systems? I mean, really? So then the question becomes, why do we do that? It's one, we've been able to do that because we've been able to go slow. We haven't had all these outside pressures converging on us. But two, it's a power-based incentive structure. Hey, this is my system. If I let other people decide what goes on it, then it's not really mine. I think we maybe go after those mindsets a little bit in government. And if we can centralize and agree on some of this regulatory stuff, then it's just one hurdle to overcome instead of 365.
Yeah, I think that would be nice, but it's kind of etched in law, isn't it? The services, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Space Force, and SOCOM, their job is to man, train, and equip. So they equip, and they say, these are my standards, and this is how I do that.
Yeah, that's true, and that is Title 10 authority, but it doesn't say anything about ATOs. It doesn't say anything about, hey, can we buy off each other's contracts? It doesn't say anything about that stuff. If you look at, like, I can't remember, it was like the 1967 National Defense Authorization Act. Like, there was a one-line item for the Air Force. It said $76 million for TAC Air. That was it. There wasn't like, you shall spend it doing this, this, and this, and this. It was like, here's the money, go figure it out, move quickly.
I'm just going to, again, riff off of what Mac just said. The opportunity space for reducing costs to the government is based on bureaucracy, not the people who are executing it. There's a lot of people who say, oh, there's tons of, government waste, we should get rid of all these civilians and reduce that. Actually, if we took away civilians from many of these jobs, those people who are trying to get permits or opportunity or having to comply with the regulations would be at an absolute standstill. What we need to do is get rid of the multiple regulations. There's a federal acquisition regulation, there's a defense federal acquisition regulations, there's a Navy, Air Force, Army implementation of SOCOM. Anyone who has buying authority have their own implementation of the implementation of the implementation. So absolutely with him. That's what I was mentioning when I was saying earlier that I couldn't get everybody to agree on just one way of doing things. It would be nice to get that off as a cost. It's an impediment.
All right, now this has been some very DoD and national security centric kind of conversations because we have a lot of roots there. But there's a lot of folks in the audience who are from commercial enterprises. Some CISOs from large organizations are here, a couple CTOs, lots of startups. I think we should think about what can we advise them on how to move faster in convergence. For example, how does an enterprise better state requirements to folks they're going to buy from or who their integrators are going to be to get the kind of solutions they need?
I'd like to invert that. I believe that if we would tell people what the outcome is that we desire and let them offer to us solutions, we'd be in a better place. We overspecify what we ask from industry. We overspecify.
Yeah, no, I'll echo that. That's been the basis of DIU since its beginning. Is there's no solicitations, there's no requirements. We just state a problem because we want to leverage everybody out there, your brilliant minds, your brilliant innovations, your brilliant solutions. Tell us what we need because we don't know. I mean, there's the assumption when you have the federal acquisition regulations that the government knows what it needs. That's a ridiculous assumption. I mean, Google alone outspends the entire U.S. government on artificial intelligence research. So how do we leverage that? I think it's outcomes-based is really the way to go. Like, here's our problems. This is what we need. Put that out and let people that really focus on those fields tell you what the options are.
I do think that applies to every business I can think of. If you're the CEO or CIO, of course you articulate things that you want to acquire, but you need to, what job do you want to get done? And then push that as your requirement, not the detailed specifications.
There's one other area that we could improve on, and that's democratization of access. One of the things in this particular domain with the digitalization of the sciences is that we, as a Defense Department, have put up incredible barriers for the entry of commercial and upstart, new start, whatever you want to call them, coming in to help the government. A lot of those barriers are things such as you can't get a clearance unless you have a contract, and you can't get a contract unless you have a clearance. Something wrong there. right? Or let's say that if there is a software that the government uses and we want to improve it, I don't give access to it. How can you improve it if you don't actually get it? You can't do it through words. So there's a huge list of things that we could do to improve access. A lot of people focus in on the other things, the bureaucracy. Hey, Truth in Negotiating Act, you have to use my cost accounting model, I can go through it, all those. Those are actually nominal. They have certainly a financial lift that you have to make to be able to cross over it. But a lot of the barriers are different than those bureaucratic ones. It's simple access.
I want to ask you guys another question, and this is kind of in the quantum domain. There's a lot going on in the quantum world. There's quantum sensing, there's quantum communications, there's quantum-based security companies. One is here, Quintessence Labs. They have a quantum capability. There's quantum compute. And there's a lot of argument about when we will have quantum computing of a sufficient capability that will be able to run this Shor's algorithm or Grover's algorithm and break our current asymmetric encryption. You talk to some people who are building it and they'll say, oh, within 3 years. Others will say 20 years. I think it's prudent to say within 5 years. And that is why NIST and others have been moving so fast to select the right algorithms that we all need to put in place. So here's something where I think controls are important. I think it's very important that the government play the leadership role they are in saying government will adopt these new algorithms and new methods for protecting our data. And so that's a control that's good. But I want to ask you guys your thoughts about quantum. How do we, first of all, should industry move as fast as government when it comes to protecting their stuff against these quantum threats? You say yes, why?
So it's all about the economy. I think that was a presidential thing a few years ago. If we do not have a strong economy, we do not have the resources to have national security. So if I am an industry partner, or if I'm an industry period, I should be actively trying to protect what is my differentiation on the market that creates my revenue stream. Why would I not want to protect it? That's data, that's information, that's people, it's everything that has to do with the model that I built that I preclude myself as a good seller of goods. That's, to me, foundational to why it's important for people to start looking at what they're going to do to change in order to be able to address and be prepared for the new digital era.
Let the scientists talk first.
You know, well, on the algorithm encryption side, I don't have too strong of an opinion, but I can just kind of share some sentiments from sort of the startup and venture capital investing side of things, which is really just that the enthusiasm has certainly shifted more towards, I guess, what you call like basically quantum stuff that's not quantum computing, you know, quantum sensing and that kind of stuff in communications. And this is way more interesting. I feel like there's been a lot of technical roadblocks in getting like a fully error-corrected quantum computer and scaling that up to a large impact. And then also it's kind of like this big open question of like, what are you going to use it for besides breaking encryption? And you know, maybe you use it for intelligent protein design, but then we have AlphaFold, and that's not a quantum computer. And so, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to get there, or when we're going to get there, or if this is another thing. It's like, you know, it's the same with the AI risk. Because, you know, everyone's like, oh my God, AI is getting so smart so fast, and it's going to take over the world. And then already the model competencies are saturating, like below the limit of human intelligence, and the risk was never there. So I'm always like skeptical of like saying like we should hit the brakes on foundational scientific progress because it's going to be so dangerous and destroy the world. I'd always say it's like, yeah, is that really going to happen? And like, how fast are we going to get there? So I'm not an expert, but I would just say it's like it's not a threat on my radar right now. Maybe I'm ignorant.
Well, let me say there's the threat of your data being acquired today that is encrypted that 5 years from now will be decrypted. So that means we should, if that data is going to be important to you 5 years from now, better protect it now.
Yeah, I'll go with the Boy Scout model on that. Be prepared. You know, there is a probability that this is coming. So if you are adopting encryption, if you are doing those things, okay, be prepared. The second thing that kind of concerns me with quantum, and it's all over the map, is we just don't understand where we're going to be in 3 years. Like 3 years ago, nobody was talking about large language models. Well,
I was.
I wasn't.
That's why I couldn't raise money. No one else was, yeah.
Yeah, that's why you're doing what you do and what I do. No, but we weren't really thinking about, as a nation, the majority of us weren't thinking about those things and the impacts that those are having. You know, quantum's probably the next thing. I don't understand the use cases. I don't understand fully. I understand the use cases better than I understand the potential technologies and the potential impacts of those technologies. I think it's prudent to start adopting a mindset, okay, these are the likely outcomes from this new technology, and I should prepare my company and my government to be ready for those.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I wanted to say, can we spend the last couple minutes on our panel here talking about artificial general intelligence, AGI? Because frankly, that's something I want, and I want it tomorrow. And I want my own AGI that I can have at home, that I would, if I had an AGI at home, I would use it to protect myself against all these serious risks against my privacy. But I also want to offer an opinion and get you guys to push back on this. I don't see anything happening in the world today that is on a path that's going to give us true AGI as currently defined. I see a lot of great tools, a lot of powerful AI, but this true capability that's human-like across multiple dimensions, I don't see that yet. Do you?
I'd say no. I could sort of answer with some weird thoughts on that. Yeah. So one is that like the limits to intelligence is the intelligence of the environment you train in, and so that's one thing. So your AI is not going to get smarter in bulk than just the human corpus of text, and the learning rate or how data parsimonious it is already atrocious. I mean, a human doesn't have to read the whole internet to learn how to write an essay. So I would say, we've kind of this is the most moving goalpost ever. Like the AI has already blown way past the Turing test, and 10 years ago, if you showed them something from today, they'd be like, oh my God, that's AGI for sure, right? But I think what maybe you're really talking about is something able to learn new things from a physical environment, that has an epistemological capacity, right? So for that, I think I would agree with a lot of these folks talk about you need to have an artificial intelligence system that is ultimately connected to some kind of body that has sensory contact with the world and is able to form new beliefs as a result of those sensory experiences like we do, right? That's kind of like, it has to be an epistemological AI. And I don't know if current model architectures are getting there, and that's a belief shared by like Gary Marcus and Yann LeCun and some others. So I don't think we're anywhere closer to having like a conscious AI. Certainly not. I think that's just sort of probably never going to happen. At least not in my lifetime. And then it's always this definition of AGI, and it's like, well, are we not AGI enough for you yet, or what is AGI then for you? I mean.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think, and I looked it up on Wikipedia, and there's some very good, academic definitions there. But my view is it's going to change because we will never reach it. So they'll keep redefining AGI. And right now, I think they're defining it as intelligence that can operate at a human level across multiple disciplines. But I think it's got to be more than that.
I mean, we're already there with the human level across multiple disciplines. Like you talk to ChatGPT about these kind of stuff. I mean, I would say though, I would say for the question of alignment, the only thing that will align an intelligent, self-modifying agent like a human is the incentive structure it operates inside of, right? If it's truly self-modifying, then any amount of conditioning or biasing or reinforcement learning through human feedback you kind of give it, it will be able to escape. And that is like a person. Everyone can grow up in some cult and then escape it later by modifying themselves. But ultimately, what aligns people towards pro-social, positive sum collaborations is the fact that they take part in this kind of capitalized or capitalist economy, right? And so I think this is, well, we can produce AGI, but what's going to prevent it from being evil is aligning its incentives to have pro-social outcomes. And perhaps that means giving it something like a body or giving it economic rights and participation in some capacity. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things, like how do you do it in a form factor that's actually useful? Looking at the Department of Defense and use of AI, how do we take that and put it on something that's useful in and of itself that doesn't have to tie back into something else? Because if you look at the EW environment that we've got in Ukraine, for instance, comms are not a given. So can we get it down to a form factor that's actually useful, even in a limited basis, not even talking AGI, we're just talking an AI-enabled something. We're not even there fully yet. And we haven't incorporated any ideas on how we would exert control over something like that if we do get there, the whole human in the loop discussion. So from a practical application in a government sort of function, I think we're so far away from that it's like discussing it at this point is almost like discussing a quantum computer 20 years ago.
I almost really have nothing to add. I would just say that it took 1 billion years to get to the human brain where its computing capacity is, and it was through trial and error. So I think we're on a path to something. I don't know if it'll be so precise as what we've defined AGI, but I think there's going to be use and utility to it, but I don't know if that's the ultimate goal.
Great, thanks. And before we thank the panel, I wanted to say we're going to go into an afternoon break. And this afternoon only, it's okay to have as many carbs as you want, and there should be carbs out there. So with that, thank the panel.